Had Mr. COVID the 19th not made such a strong appearance, a group of us from South Fork would have arrived back last Sunday from a Christ in Youth conference in Anderson, Indiana. I was really looking forward to going to this conference because I started going as a young student here at South Fork, and I can't even remember how many conferences I've been to. I tried to figure out, it's got to be at least 20 or more between going as a student and as a youth minister and taking a number of kids. Um, Everything since God gave Bob Stacy a vision of having thousands of kids come together for an intensive week of Christian learning and fun, only God knows how many students have really been impacted by that ministry. Our plan is, whatever we can do next year, to get to a CIY conference, of course, if Mr. COVID's offspring don't start hatching all over the place. If we do get to go, we're going to come back, and you're probably going to see some of the students wearing T-shirts, or you're going to hear them talk about the theme for the week, because CIY always has great themes. In fact, I remember one from, I think I was in junior high or maybe a high school, my freshman year of high school, when we went to a conference, and this was the theme, okay? It was just these letters, PTHWSITI. We tried to figure out how to say that. Is it Pwthcity? I mean, how do you say that theme? I remember walking into the auditorium at Millikan College, I think is where we were at, and there was this big banner across the front of the stage, and it had these letters in great big bold capitals with these words in between them. Praise to him who specializes in the impossible. Now, in today's world of branding and marketing and all of that, I'm guessing that CIY is probably not going to have a theme quite that long. But I got to tell you what, that one stuck with me for 45 years. Praise to him who specializes in the impossible. And as we continue our Sunday morning series through the Old Testament book of Daniel and the fact that it's Father's Day, I think it's a good day to talk about the impossible, don't you? I really hope that all of us at some point had a dad that we could look up to that we thought, man, he could do the impossible. Maybe he could solve problems like how do you provide for your family when resources are so limited, but yet everything was taken care of. And then there's that annual problem that seems like only dads could solve, which was how is it that Santa Claus delivers and puts together all those toys in all the homes in just a few-hour period every Christmas Eve? I think dads only know the answer to that question. Maybe it was settling arguments between siblings, because sometimes dads could do the impossible by just saying the right words in the right way at the right time. My hope really is that all of us have had dads or still have dads that we look to and think, you know what, sometimes they can just do the impossible. So to all of you dads out there who are doing that, let me just say thank you. And keep up the good work, dads. And as one of you, I promise I'm not going to tell our little secret about how we do those impossible things. But when it comes to the study of the book of Daniel, Daniel couldn't keep a secret about how he was able to do the impossible. For Daniel, it truly was the same story time after time after time. No matter what new reality he found himself in, he still trusted the same God. And I'm really hoping that as we are experiencing new realities almost daily in our lives, that we're going to learn from Daniel and that we will do exactly the same thing. Today, I'm going to invite everybody to turn to Daniel chapter 2, and we're going to read a story. It was really an impossible life and death situation that Daniel and his friends found themselves in, and yet God delivered them from it. It was during the third year of Daniel's apprenticeship in Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar began having some serious insomnia. And the king wanted to know what's going on. And so we read about this, and we read about these impossible parameters that he put forth for any human to diagnose his problem. So turn with me to Daniel chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. It says this: In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. Now, we got to remember this. Back in the day, they took dreams a lot more seriously than we do today. In fact, the Babylonians believed that dreams was the primary way that the gods would communicate messages to the people, especially about their future. So it was critical that King Nebuchadnezzar tried to figure out what this dream meant. So he brought in his advisory team. Now, look at this advisory team, would you? Magicians, okay? Not like we normally think of magicians. Because in Egypt, magicians were dream interpreters who had studied a lot of literature about people's dreams. And they began to see patterns and things that they could then listen to someone else's dream and then put together an interpretation of what that meant. So that was the magicians back in Egypt, and Babylon just adopted that whole same practice to where most dream interpreters, most kings had dream interpreters in their court. Then there were enchanters, the writer says. This refers to the Mesopotamians who were specialists in exorcisms. These were the people who defended against threatening messages that would come through omens and dreams. Their job was to make sure that they could identify exactly what was evil about this dream and then do some type of ritual or incantation to turn it aside. Sorcerers? In Babylon, that refers to those who could cast out spells. And so if the dream was insinuating in any way that a spell had been cast on the king, this sorcerer was there to cast out that spell. Chaldeans, some of your translations may have the word astrologers there. That refers to the priestly guild of diviners who specialized in astrology. Because the belief back then was the gods not only communicated through dreams, but they communicated through messages in the stars as well. Think about the birth of Jesus. And you can make a connection there as well. So, this group of 4 people, okay, these are what I'm going to call the wise guys, okay, that Nebuchadnezzar called in to try to solve his insomnia. Which back then, this was a pretty normal team. This would have been the advisors to the king. Now, I pray with all of my heart that our world leaders today aren't relying on the same groups of people. But then again, who knows? You know, this wasn't the first time the king had called them in to solve a problem, and the king just wanted to make sure that he got the right answer, so he really set them up to do something that was humanly impossible. Let's keep reading in Daniel chapter 2, verse 3. It says, the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans, or the astrologers, said to him in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. And the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. And they answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. And the king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time because you see that the word in me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you shall show me its interpretation. And the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there's not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand. For no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asked is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, small g, whose dwelling is not with flesh. I don't know about you, but the first response that I get to this group of advisors to the king is they sound like a bunch of whining little kids. Gosh, king, that's too hard. We can't do that. It's kind of like when, if you had kids and they play all day in their room and they make a huge mess, and then mom comes in the evening and says, okay, it's time to clean it up, and they're like, oh, it's too much. We just can't do it. That's kind of the impression that I get of these guys. They knew that the king was asking them something that was humanly impossible, so at least they admit that it takes somebody beyond themselves to do it. But keep in mind this, these guys' job was to know those gods well enough to be able to interpret those dreams and communicate on their behalf. So, you know what? I think this brings a point that I want to just make today, and that is that fake gods and those who represent them just can't do the impossible. Fake gods and those who represent them in any way just are not capable of doing the impossible. The bottom line was, the king even hinted at it, he began to see that these guys were pretenders. They were just beginning to take advantage of the king, and so he knew that this message that he had in this dream was so serious that he was willing to wipe out his entire advisory team and start over if need be, because look at what happens in verse 12. Because of those reactions, the king was angry and very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed. And they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is this decree of the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. Verse 16, key. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Notice a difference between Daniel's response and his approach than those who worked for the fake gods. They were insecure and hesitant, but Daniel was bold. We can't miss the fact that Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah were being sought out by Arioch for one purpose, and that was to kill them. Because they were one of these wise men that the king had declared to be killed. It was a matter of life and death, but Daniel didn't appear to be too rattled by it. In fact, God gave him prudence and discretion to not only know the exact words to say to Arioch, but to also say to the king. So here's another point that I think we need to pull out from this passage, and that's this. When we're trusting the one true God and not fake gods, we're going to have confidence when facing life's challenges. We're not going to whine, we're not going to complain, but we're going to seek solutions, and we're going to find answers just like Daniel did. I want you to think for a moment about some spiritually mature person that you know that when they encountered hard times and difficult times, how do they react? Do they whine and complain? Or are they calm and are they filled with peace like Daniel was? You know what? They probably have that calmness and that peace because they've done the same thing that we looked at last week that Daniel did, and that is that he immediately went and he asked his friends to pray with him. But what we didn't talk about last week was what else Daniel did once God gave him the answer to the king's dream. Look at Daniel chapter 2, verse 19. It says, "Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night." Then, right then, Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He moves kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter." What was it that Daniel immediately did when God revealed the answer? Okay, it was the middle of the night, But if you had this information, would you have not run to the king's palace and woke up the king and said, hey, I've got the answer, I've got the answer? But that's not what Daniel did. Instead, what Daniel did was he took time to acknowledge God and to bless God, as the ESV says. And so the point that I would make of this is that as God reveals answers and solutions to our problems and all these changes in our lives, the first thing that we need to do is to bless him for those answers. I won't go in today between the difference between just thanking God and blessing God, but there is a difference. And I hope and I pray that we'll be like Daniel in that we will bless God for what he does and not just thank God for what he does for us. The story continues. Daniel goes before the king, and the very first thing that Daniel then does before the king is he acknowledges that I didn't do this. It was impossible for me to do this, but my God did it for me. Look at that in verse 26. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar. We talked about that last week. He says, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Look at how Daniel answers. He says, no wise man, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Sometimes it's hard to know what God's up to, isn't it? I guarantee you there was no Israelite who would have been really happy about Babylon coming in and conquering Jerusalem and taking them into Babylonian captivity. None of them would have enjoyed that. But look at what God was able to do as a result of that event. Putting Daniel in the position that he was in so that he could stand before the king, and the king himself could hear about the power of the one true God. That never would have happened had God's solution to Israel's unfaithfulness not been exile. So perhaps another thing that we need to consider from this. As all this change is spinning around us and all these things seem to be happening out of our control, maybe we just need to ask this question. What's God up to? What's God doing in all of this? You know, today we hear a lot about people being transparent. Everybody wants to be transparent in everything. You know what? God is completely transparent with us, 100%. But the problem is this. His ways are so high and so much different than ours, we just can't understand what he's saying. And so what it comes down to is, in times like that, when we ask him, God, what are you doing? And we just don't understand, we have to trust that he's the same God that delivered Daniel, who will deliver us as well. You know, Daniel goes on to do exactly what the king asked him to do. He told him the dream, and then he interpreted it for him. And the interpretation, sometimes we want to focus on that. I don't think that's the main point of Daniel's thing here. I think because the interpretation just basically said the Babylonian Empire, which was the one that Nebuchadnezzar was leading, was going to be overtaken by the Medo-Persian Empire, which is King Cyrus, which we'll talk about in a few weeks. And they were going to be defeated by the Greeks, and the Greeks were going to be defeated by the Romans, okay? That's the nutshell of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And Daniel pointed out that it was God himself who put Nebuchadnezzar at the top of the statue. He was the head of gold. But all these other kingdoms were going to replace him. And they would be inferior, yet as we know, all of those empires added great things to the world. But here's the thing that I don't think we can miss from the king's dream, because I guarantee you Nebuchadnezzar didn't miss it. Look at verse 34. Again, this is Daniel describing what Nebuchadnezzar dreamed. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them to pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken into pieces and became like chaff of the summer on the summer threshing floors. and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Do you realize what this is? This is the first prophecy about Jesus Christ in the book of Daniel. How many times is Jesus referred to as the stone that the builders rejected, or the cornerstone? He is this rock. And Nebuchadnezzar saw this rock removed by a supernatural power from wherever it was, on the side of a mountain or laying someplace, and thrown against the statue, and it shattered everything else. This part of the dream makes this point very clear. The kingdom of heaven is greater. The kingdom of heaven is greater than anything else that exists on the face of this earth. There's some debate amongst Bible scholars about, is this referring to Jesus' first coming or his second coming? You know what? I have no problem at all saying that it all started when Jesus came to this earth and started the kingdom of God, and then died, resurrected, and went back into heaven, and it's going to continue when he comes back the second time. Can you understand that the rock here is Jesus? The kingdom is the kingdom of heaven that we are now a part of because Jesus is our king. And I want you just to listen to how Daniel describes this kingdom that we are a part of. Again, hundreds of years before Jesus. Verse 44. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break into pieces all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, Daniel says, and its interpretation is sure. I don't know about you, but when I read that description of that kingdom compared to all of the other kingdoms, this song comes to mind. Watch. I don't think I've ever used the Hallelujah Chorus as a sermon illustration before. But you know what? In the midst of everything that's going on, is there a better song to remind us that God's kingdom is greater than anything else? Those of you who are at home and unable to see that video, it was done by the Royal Opera House, and it was done through social distancing where 66 different musicians and vocalists did their part individually. Then it was mixed together into an incredible video, so I encourage you to look that up online. And for the rest of us, hopefully that's an encouragement and a reminder. You know, what's interesting is most of the time when we hear that song, we stand because we know how true it is. But you know what happened when Daniel communicated the truth to Nebuchadnezzar about what was going to happen and with the kingdom of God? He fell on his face. He bowed before Daniel because he knew exactly what Daniel said was true. So here's what I hope to be true in our lives too. In these times when things are changing and happening faster than we could even fathom, what Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar happened just exactly like he said that it was going to happen. Jesus came to this earth. He was born in a manger in Bethlehem. He started the kingdom of God here on earth. He died on a cross. He rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven. And one day he's going to return, and every person, whether we've done for after his first visit or his second visit, is going to bow and call him Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Let me just ask you this. If we believe that to be true, then nothing that happens on this earth right now, whether it be long overdue changes in our social justice system, whether it be a worldwide pandemic, or the decay of the political process that we've known it for years, God still reigns. And if we believe that, if we believe that God still reigns, then we don't need to be fearful, anxious, angry, stressed out, or worried about life or death or anything else. We're living in a new reality. And we're going to continue to live in new realities until the day we die. So what I hope and I pray is that we can find peace by trusting in the same God that did the impossible for Daniel and who wants to do the impossible for us.